Your mother is on line 1. The words hit me like ice water. Sarah, my assistant, stood in my office doorway with that careful expression she wore when delivering potentially explosive news. 4 years of absolute silence, and now this. I stared at the blinking light on my phone. Line 1, Judith Foster, the woman who'd raised me, shaped me, then erased me from family photos when I chose my own path. Should I tell her you're in a meeting? Sarah asked gently. She knew the history, knew why no one with the last name Foster ever made it past our reception desk. No, my voice came out steadier than I felt. I'll take it. The office suddenly felt too quiet as Sarah closed the door behind her. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline stretched endlessly, a testament to the company I'd built from nothing. 7 figures in annual revenue, 53 employees, featured on the cover of Tech Innovator last month. Everything I'd accomplished while my family pretended I didn't exist. I picked up the phone. Hello, Mother. Maxwell. Her voice carried that familiar mix of warmth and manipulation, like honey laced with something bitter. How are you, sweetheart? Sweetheart. The endearment felt like a slap after years of silence. I'm fine. What do you want? A pause. I could hear her recalibrating, probably hadn't expected the directness. The old Maxwell would have been apologetic, eager to please, desperate for any scrap of her approval. We need to talk. Your father and I, there's been a situation with Evan. Evan, the golden child, the one who'd followed their prescribed path, Harvard MBA, prestigious consulting firm, corner office by 30. The son they'd chosen to keep when they'd discarded me. What kind of situation? He's between opportunities right now. The firm made some restructuring decisions and he got fired. Another pause. It's more complicated than that. Of course it was. With Evan, everything was always more complicated, more nuanced, more deserving of understanding than my own choices had ever been. Maxwell, we'd like to meet with you. For coffee, just to talk. The irony wasn't lost on me. 4 years ago, when I dropped out of law school to start my company, when I'd begged them to believe in me, they'd made their position crystal clear. You're not our son anymore, my father had said. Don't come back until you're ready to be responsible. Now here they were calling me, right when their perfect son had stumbled, right when my company was making headlines. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for my response. The silence stretched between us, filled with 4 years of hurt and anger and the desperate need for validation I'd never quite managed to kill. When? I heard myself ask. Tomorrow, that little place downtown you used to like, Cafe Luna, used to like, past tense, as if the person who'd once spent Sunday mornings there with them was someone else entirely. Which I suppose he was. Fine, 10 a.m. Maxwell, I hung up before she could finish. Before she could say whatever manipulative thing she'd rehearsed to pull me back into their web of conditional love and impossible expectations. My hands were shaking. 4 years of therapy, 4 years of building boundaries, 4 years of learning that my worth wasn't tied to their approval, and one phone call had me right back to feeling like that desperate 20-something begging for their acceptance. I walked to my window, pressing my palms against the cool glass. Below, the city hummed with life. My city, where I'd built something real from nothing. Where I'd proven them wrong every single day for 4 years, but this time was different. This time, I wasn't the failure they'd disowned. I was the CEO of a thriving company, and they needed something from me. The power dynamic had shifted, and we all knew it. The question haunted me through the night. What did I need from them? And more importantly, what was I willing to give up to get it? I'd barely slept, my mind cycling through scenarios for the morning's meeting. By the time I walked into Cafe Luna at 9:55 a.m., I'd rehearsed a dozen different conversations, each one ending with me either triumphant or devastated. They were already there. My father, Howard, sat rigid in his banker's uniform, navy suit, conservative tie, the same disapproving expression he'd worn when I'd announced my entrepreneurial dreams. My mother, Judith, had chosen the corner booth, positioning herself where she could orchestrate the entire interaction. Maxwell. She stood to hug me, and I let her, feeling the familiar manipulation in her touch, just enough warmth to make me question my defenses, not enough to feel genuine. Mom, Dad. I slid into the booth across from them, noting how they'd positioned themselves as a united front. You look good, my father said, and I caught the surprise in his voice, as if he'd expected 4 years of family rejection to have broken me. Business is good, I replied evenly. Yes, we've been reading about your success. My mother's voice carried that particular tone she used when admitting something she'd rather not acknowledge. The article in Tech Innovator was quite impressive. They'd been reading about me. Following my career from a distance while maintaining their silence, the realization hit harder than I'd expected. You didn't call to congratulate me when it came out, I said. My father shifted uncomfortably. We thought, After everything that happened. After you disowned me, you mean? The words hung in the air between us. My mother reached for her coffee cup, buying time. We were hurt, Maxwell. You chose to abandon everything we'd worked for, everything we'd planned. I chose to build something meaningful instead of following a path that would have made me miserable. And look where it got Evan, my father said quietly. There it was, the real reason for this meeting. Tell me about Evan's situation, I said. My mother's composure cracked slightly. He was let go 3 weeks ago. They said it was performance-related, but Maxwell, you know how these corporate restructurings work. It's all politics. I did know how they worked. I also knew that Evan had coasted through life on charm and connections, never developing the work ethic that sustained real success. My parents had enabled that by smoothing every path, solving every problem, ensuring he never faced real consequences. What does this have to do with me? He needs work, my father said bluntly. Good work, the kind that will get his career back on track. The ask was coming. I could feel it building in the space between us. Your company, my mother continued, it's exactly the kind of innovative environment that would showcase his talents. He's got an MBA from Harvard, experience at McKinsey. Experience getting fired from McKinsey, I corrected. Maxwell. My mother's voice carried that warning tone I remembered from childhood. He's your brother. Brother. The word felt foreign after 4 years of being treated like a stranger. Where was my brother when you cut me out of family photos? Where was he when you returned my Christmas cards unopened? Where was he when I was building this company from nothing while you pretended I didn't exist? That's not fair, my father said. Evan was trying to respect our decision. Evan was protecting his position as the golden child, I said, just like he's doing now by sending you to clean up his mess. The truth settled over our table like a heavy blanket. They hadn't come here to reconcile. They hadn't come because they missed me or regretted their choices. They'd come because they needed something, and I was finally in a position to provide it. We're asking you to help your family, my mother said, her voice taking on that guilt-laden tone that had controlled me for so many years. My family, I repeated slowly. The family that disowned me for following my dreams. The family that celebrated my brother's mediocrity while dismissing my achievements. That family. We made mistakes, my father admitted, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine regret in his eyes. But we're here now, we're trying to fix things. By asking me to hire Evan. By asking you to help us heal this rift, my mother corrected. Family is family, Maxwell. Blood is thicker than water. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw the same people who'd raised me to believe that love was earned through performance, that acceptance was conditional on conformity. They hadn't changed. They just recalibrated their expectations based on new circumstances. I'll consider it, I said finally, but if Evan wants to work for my company, he'll go through the same process as everyone else. Interviews, references, the works, no special treatment. My mother's face brightened. Of course, that's all we're asking. I'm not finished. My voice cut through her relief. And I want something in return. They waited, and I could see the wariness creeping back into their expressions. I want an apology, a real one, for the 4 years of silence, for the disownment, for treating me like a failure when I was building something extraordinary. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken hurt and stubborn pride. We can discuss that, my father said carefully. No discussion, an apology, or Evan can find his own job. I stood up, leaving them sitting in the booth with their half-finished coffees and their uncomfortable truths. I'll have my assistant send you the application process, I said. Evan can start there like everyone else. As I walked away, I heard my mother call my name, but I didn't turn back. For the first time in 4 years, I held all the cards. The question was whether I was strong enough to play them. 2 days later, I had my answer. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Sarah knocked on my door. Your mother is here, she said, her voice carefully neutral. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting it's urgent. I looked up from my laptop. Just my mother. She's with a man, older, well-dressed, and there's a younger guy with them who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Evan, they'd brought Evan. Send them in, I said, closing my laptop. And Sarah, stay close. This might get interesting. They filed into my office like a delegation, my mother leading the charge with that determined smile she wore when she was about to get her way. My father followed, his banker's composure intact, but his eyes scanning my office with what looked like grudging respect. And behind them, Evan, I hadn't seen my brother in 4 years. He looked older, softer around the edges, his expensive suit unable to hide the slight slump in his shoulders that spoke of recent defeat. When our eyes met, he looked away first. Maxwell, my mother began, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. We thought it would be better to handle this in person. Handle what exactly? The application process, my father said. It seems unnecessarily complicated for a family situation. I leaned back in my chair, studying them. They'd arranged themselves in formation again, my parents flanking Evan like protective shields, ready to smooth his path just as they always had. Every applicant goes through the same process, I said. No exceptions. But surely you can make an exception for your brother, my mother pressed. He's overqualified for most positions here. Is he? I turned to Evan, who'd been silent since entering. What position are you interested in? He shifted uncomfortably. I was thinking, maybe something in business development or strategy, leveraging my McKinsey experience. We don't have any openings in those areas. Well, what do you have? I pulled up our current job postings on my computer. Junior developer, marketing coordinator, customer service representative. Sales associate. The silence was deafening. I watched my parents exchange glances, their discomfort palpable. Those are entry-level positions, my father said finally. Yes, they are. We're a growing company, but we're not a charity for unemployed consultants. Maxwell, my mother's voice carried that warning tone again. There's no need to be cruel. I'm not being cruel, I'm being professional, something this family never understood. Evan finally spoke up. Look, Maxwell, I know things have been complicated between us, but I'm in a tough spot here. I need something that reflects my experience level. Your experience level, I repeated. You mean the experience that got you fired from McKinsey? I wasn't fired, he said quickly. It was a restructuring. Evan, my voice cut through his explanation. I know people at McKinsey. I know exactly what happened. The color drained from his face. My parents looked between us, sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. You were let go for performance issues, I continued. Specifically for taking credit for a junior associate's work and then throwing her under the bus when the client complained about execution. The firm had to issue a formal apology and refund their fees. That's not. How did you? I make it my business to know things. Especially when they involve my family. My mother's composure was cracking. Even if that's true, people make mistakes. Family forgives, I interrupted. But employers don't, and right now I'm an employer first. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Below, people moved with purpose, building careers, chasing dreams, creating value. Everything I'd learned to do without my family's support. Here's what's going to happen, I said, not turning around. Evan can apply for any open position through our normal channels. He'll interview with the hiring committee just like everyone else. If he's the best candidate, he'll get the job. If not, he won't. But Maxwell, my mother started. I'm not finished. I turned back to face them. And I want that apology I mentioned, not just from you two, but from Evan as well. For 4 years of silence, for letting you erase me from this family without saying a word. Evan looked genuinely confused. What was I supposed to do? You chose to leave. I chose to follow my dreams. You chose to let them disown me rather than risk your own position. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Fair, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been one phone call in 4 years, one text message, one acknowledgement that I existed. We're here now, my father said quietly. We're trying to make things right. No, you're trying to use me to fix Evan's problems, just like you always have. I walked back to my desk, pulling out a business card. Here's our HR director's contact information. Evan can call her to discuss available positions. The process typically takes 2 to 3 weeks. My mother stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous, Maxwell. We're your family. You're the people who raised me, I corrected. Family is something different. What's that supposed to mean? I thought about Jackson, my business partner, who'd believed in me when no one else would. About Sarah, who'd worked late countless nights to help build this company. About the team of people who'd chosen to be here, who'd earned their places through merit and dedication. It means I've learned the difference between people who love you conditionally and people who support you unconditionally. You've spent 4 years proving which category you belong in. Evan finally found his voice. So you're just going to humiliate me? Make me interview for some entry-level job? I'm going to treat you exactly the way you'd be treated at any other company. If that feels like humiliation, maybe you should examine your expectations. My father stood up, his banker's composure finally cracking. We raised you better than this. No, I said quietly. You raised me to believe that love was earned through performance. That acceptance was conditional on conformity. That family loyalty only flowed one direction. I looked at each of them in turn. I've learned to do better. They filed out of my office in the same formation they'd entered, but something had shifted. The power dynamic had changed, and we all knew it. After they left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city below. For the first time in 4 years, I felt truly free from their expectations. Whether Evan got the job or not, Whether they ever apologized or not, I'd finally learned to stop needing their approval. The question now was whether they'd learn to earn mine. 3 weeks later, I had my answer, and it wasn't what any of us had expected. I was in my office reviewing the quarterly budget when Jackson knocked on my door. As my business partner and head of operations, he'd been handling Evan's interview process to avoid any appearance of favoritism. "We need to talk about your brother," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the expression he wore when delivering bad news. "How bad?" "Remember that junior developer position he applied for? The one he said was beneath his skill set, but he'd graciously consider." I winced. "Please tell me he didn't actually say that in the interview." "He did, along with asking if we could fast-track him to a leadership role once he'd demonstrated his capabilities." "Christ." Jackson pulled out his tablet, scrolling through notes. "It gets worse. When our lead developer asked him about his coding experience, he said he'd managed developers at McKinsey and didn't need to get his hands dirty with technical details." I rubbed my temples, feeling a familiar headache building. "What about the other positions?" Marketing coordinator interview lasted 15 minutes. He spent most of it explaining how his strategic vision was wasted on tactical execution. Customer service was even shorter. He asked if we had any client-facing leadership opportunities instead. And sales. He showed up 20 minutes late, spent the entire interview on his phone, and asked if the base salary was negotiable upward before we'd even discussed the role. I stared out my window at the Seattle skyline, wondering how my parents had managed to raise someone so completely disconnected from reality. Then I remembered they'd never let him fail. Every stumble had been cushioned, every consequence softened, every hard lesson learned by someone else. "What's the committee's recommendation?" "Unanimous no on all positions. I'm sorry, Maxwell, I know this puts you in a difficult position." Before I could respond, Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Foster, your parents are here. They say they need to speak with you urgently." I looked at Jackson, who raised an eyebrow. "Want me to stick around?" "Please." My parents entered like they owned the place, my mother's face flushed with indignation, my father's jaw set in that stubborn line I remembered from childhood arguments. Evan trailed behind them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Maxwell," my mother began without preamble, "we need to discuss this interview process. It's clearly biased against Evan." "Biased how?" "Your people are asking him to interview for positions that don't utilize his strengths," my father said. "It's a waste of everyone's time." Jackson cleared his throat. "With respect, Mr. Foster, those are the only positions we have available. Evan applied for all of them." "And he's overqualified for all of them," my mother snapped. "Surely you can create something more appropriate for his skill level." "We don't create positions for people," I said quietly. "We hire people for positions that exist." "That's not how family businesses work," my father said. "This isn't a family business, it's my business." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the moment my parents realized they'd miscalculated, that their leverage wasn't as strong as they'd believed. "So you're just going to let him fail?" my mother asked, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm going to let him succeed or fail on his own merits, just like everyone else." "But he's your brother," she said, as if that explained everything. "My brother who hasn't spoken to me in 4 years, my brother who stood by while you disowned me, my brother who's never once asked how I was doing or celebrated my success." Evan finally spoke up. "I didn't know what to say, you just left. I built a company, I created jobs, I proved that everything you all said about my choices was wrong, and none of you cared enough to notice until you needed something from me." "We noticed," my father said quietly. We didn't know how to reach out after so much time had passed. You could have tried congratulations when I made the cover of Tech Innovator. You could have tried we're proud of you when I won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. You could have tried we were wrong any time in the last 4 years. My mother's composure finally cracked completely. "We were protecting ourselves. You hurt us when you left." "I hurt you." The words came out louder than I'd intended. "I hurt you by following my dreams, by building something meaningful. By refusing to live the life you'd planned for me. You abandoned your family," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You abandoned me first. The moment I chose a different path, you wrote me off, and now you want me to pretend none of that happened because you need something from me." Jackson stood up quietly. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, but I shook my head. "Stay, this concerns the company too." I turned back to my parents. "Here's what's going to happen. Evan didn't get any of the positions he applied for. Our hiring committee was unanimous in their decision." "This is about revenge," my father said. "This is about standards, something this family never understood." "So that's it?" my mother asked. "You're just going to let your brother struggle while you sit in your tower counting your money?" "I'm going to run my company the way it should be run." With integrity, with fairness, with the same standards for everyone. I walked to my desk, pulling out a business card. There's a startup incubator downtown. They help people with business ideas get on their feet. If Evan really wants to prove himself, he can start there. He doesn't want to start a business, my mother said. He wants a job. Then he can find one somewhere else. Based on his qualifications and interview performance, not on his last name. Evan looked at me with something that might have been respect. You really meant it, didn't you? About treating me like everyone else. I meant every word. Even though we're family? Especially because we're family. Real family doesn't ask you to compromise your principles. Real family doesn't make their love conditional on getting what they want. My parents exchanged glances, and I could see them recalibrating again, trying to find a new angle of attack. What if we apologized? My mother asked quietly. What if we said we were sorry for the way we handled things? Are you sorry, or are you just sorry that your strategy didn't work? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with 4 years of hurt and disappointment. I don't know, she admitted finally. I don't know the difference anymore. For the first time since they'd walked into my office, I felt something other than anger toward them, something that might have been pity. Then we don't have anything else to talk about, I said. They left without another word, Evan trailing behind them like he always had. But this time he looked back at me before closing the door. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. It wasn't worth much, but it was something. A crack in the wall they'd built around their golden child, a moment of recognition that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong about everything. After they left, Jackson whistled low. That was intense. Yeah, you okay? I looked out at the city again, at the life I'd built without them, at the company that bore my name and reflected my values. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm free.